of a program of what you do first when you come up with an engine design, be it a 1-cylinder, 2-cylinder, 4-cylinder, V6, V8, 10, 12. Hey, Charlie. Hey, Riddell. Good to see you guys. Matt, John. You have to know how big your engine's going to be, so we got to figure that out. And I do it, that's going to be how big your engine can be is based on a few things. One is the bolt circle for the heads. We've gone over this several times. Chevrolet, Ford, Chrysler, Harley, Kawasaki, 98 Evo engine, whatever. Hey, Rob. Oh, my hat. Talking about a blast from the past. We hadn't had these made in forever. If you guys have one, I know that's cool. And maybe one day we'll make some more. But it was like the style of the hat was kind of going out like, the flex fit. Then they went to the screen door back. Then they went to the trucker hat and the flat bill. So I decided to quit spending money on hats that were going out of style. But it's funny, this style hat right here, even though it's out of style, it's not a cool flat bill like Leah Pritchett and motocross guys or West Coast guys or hooligans. But it's all right. It's got I like a little arch to it. I like the logo and the flex fit, because I don't know about everybody else, but my head changes sizes all day. Sometimes when I'm really cool-headed and I feel dumb, it's kind of small. And when I feel smart and I got like something's going my way, sometimes my head gets too big. So I think a lot of us do that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the engine design and the way we do it. So the head bolts, like on a Milwaukee 8, the head bolts are real far apart, so that allows you to put a big bore in it. That's a 2017, 18, 19, and 20, and now the 21 Milwaukee 8 touring baggers for the big twins from Harley. Then you've got the twin cams, which are 99 to 2016. They all had the same size bolt pattern, so the bore was limited by the bolt pattern. Then S&S came out with their, I think they call it their 4 1/4 bore, 4 1/4 bolt pattern, and then they also have their, I think it was a super sidewinder, which was a little bit bigger, 4 1/8 bolt pattern. I think is what they called it. Yeah, 4 1/8. And then they came out with the 4 3/8, which is what the 4 3/8 bolt pattern is what the Tribute 145, the 126, and the new T143 engines are. That big bolt pattern. But listen, that bolt pattern for that big twin cam, the T143 and the 145 and the 126, that bolt pattern, as big as it is still smaller than a stock 107 Milwaukee 8. Chrysler, Chevrolet, Ford, Mopar, all those guys, they have the bolt patterns for the heads too. I think that, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, man, you would buy a hat, I know. If I had some more of these hats, I'd buy them too, but we got to order them. Hey, Mike, Jeff, I want to tell you about it. Listen, the bolt pattern, for instance, of a big block Chevrolet, big block Ford. Let me just tell you about engine design. Don't get all excited or hurt about which kind of engine I'm talking about, because we're going to do really 1 cylinder at a time, so we can talk about how to design what engine would be. Let's see, a big block Chevrolet is 4.840. That's the center to center distance on the bores, 4.840, and then you move over 4.84 inches, and then you put the next bore in. NHRA has a rule now for Pro Stock, which is 4.9 inches, so that means they'll move the bore centers, they move the head bolt pattern a little bit so they can get some nice head gaskets in between the bores. So if it's a Ford or a Chrysler or whatever, or Chevrolet, the General Motors, all of them have a 4.900 bore spacing, so that are all the same. When they got finished with it by about 2016, it's almost the same cylinder head fit on all of those engines for the Pro Stockers. Now, on Pro Stock motorcycles, let's go with the Suzuki that you see on NHRA on the TV today. They have a stock bolt pattern in the cases where they have a bore center on each cylinder, 1, 2, 3, 4, where the biggest bore is going to be dictated by how close together the bores are. So when you put Suzuki Pro Stock teams use a 89.5 bore right now, 89.5 millimeters, and I think that's 3.525 inches, somewhere in that range, real close, within 5 or 10 thou. Those almost touch each other in the center, so there's only a little bit of room for a head gasket, so that's almost as big a bore as they can go. So if I was racing Pro Stock Suzuki Kawasaki, Chevrolet, Ford, whatever, I would put the biggest bore that would fit according to the bore-to-bore spacing or the head bolt pattern. And the reason is because of head gasket. You got to have a fire ring built into the gasket. Let me grab a Comatic right here on the wall. Don't go away, I'm right here. Here's a Comatic head gasket for a twin cam. All right, this little fire ring, see this little bulge right here, that's the only thing that contains all the pressure inside the cylinder. And it is a lot of pressure when you squeeze it and light it, and it goes bang. So this is as big a bore as I would go with this bolt pattern. This is like 4125, 4135. Maybe you can get a 4200 in there, but I don't like the 4250s with this stud bolt pattern because there's no room for a gasket. You can put this back so I don't get lost. Okay, a couple notes I wrote about it. The bore, so if it's a twin, your bore, how big the engine can be will be based on when the pistons go to the bottom, how close they come to hitting each other. So when you have big giant bore like this 5-inch, 5 1/8 bore, where the pistons come together, when the pistons go down, they hit each other. So you got to have a notch here, which we've covered that before and talked about it, but I'm going to leave this out for a reference. So the biggest bore you can get. Then your rules will say how big the engine can be in total cubic inches. So what we would do then is we would make up the rest with stroke. Let's say that the engine rule is, say 100 cubic inches. Okay, if the engine rule is 100 cubic inches, I would do all the bore I could and then do the math to figure out what the stroke would be. The stroke would be what's left after you do all the bore. And why? Well, a couple things. The bore will be dictated by head bolt pattern, head gaskets, and rings. There you go. The guy at Total Seal told me one day about 10 years ago, he said, call me first. I'm the guy you call. If you're going to build an engine, you got to call me first. He said, you got to be able to, if you can get rings. If you can get rings, your custom piston manufacturer will make you a piston that will fit your bore, your favorite bore, and the rings. You just tell them what rings you want. The piston guy doesn't tell you what rings you need. You tell the ring guy what rings you want based on the bore you want, and then when you get that ring spec, wide rings, radially, axially, whatever you get for rings, then you call the piston guy and tell him what rings you're using and what bore you want. Then next, well, maybe second, I would call Comatic and ask for a gasket. Can you make me a gasket fit this? And then of course they will know if they can or not. Hey Greg, Roger, I want to tell you, Roger, Hogs Gone Wild, Roger, look, he's a friend of mine, he's a really close friend of mine. He lost his mother, and I just want everybody to, you know, give Roger a little bit of space, man. Give him a minute. Went through some tough times. You know, I lost my mother and my father too when I was younger. And it's sad, and I know everybody on here has, so I'm not gonna ruin the mood or be a buzzkill, but I just saw Roger's name pop up and I wanted us to, you know, Roger, you're in our prayers, and you matter, and we care. Okay, brother? Moving on. So the stroke is decided after we come up with a bore. So I guess, like Bagzilla, for instance, they had a 135 cubic inch rule. It was only allowed to be 135. So we got the biggest cases. We got a set of 143 cases with the big stud pattern. We got 143 cylinders, 4.425, and then we bored it out as big as we could go. And then we did the math to see what stroke it would be, and you could put like a 4.3 stroke in with a 4.47 bore or whatever. I think it's something like that. And it came out to a 135. So that's how we get the bore and the stroke on a custom engine like that. If a 135 is the rule, 143 is the rule, 131 is the rule, 124 is the rule, 114 is the rule, do the bore. The reason you want to do the bore is because that allows you to put valves in it. Let's get the light right. There you go. If you can see this giant piston, there is not room for one thou bigger valve here or one thou bigger valve here. I gotta admit here that I turned this flip screen thing around and mirrored it so the word Star Racing would be spelled right, and my shirt would be spelled right, and my hat would be spelled right. And it's so backwards. this is my left and this is my right, but I'm backwards. So when I go like this and I miss it, it's because I got the camera backwards from where I'm at. Anyway, make fun of me, I'm good with it. All right. The valve size, the valve size that you can run in your engine is based on the bore size. So if your bore is big and it's not full, if your bore is not full of valve, you have more horsepower potential left to make. Because the only thing that keeps the air from going in your engine is the valve. When the valve's shut, it's on the seat, there's nothing going in. When the valve's shut on the seat, there's nothing going out. Only when the valve opens on the intake does air go in. I don't care if your heads are ported or not. Yes, it matters. Rocker arms matters. All that matters. But the valve is what stops the air from going in and out. Very basic, very elementary. All right. The piston design is based on the rings, the gasket, and the valve size. Okay, so when we're building our engine in order, we would figure out, okay, I've got this bore, I've got this stroke, and these bigger valves will fit. Okay, that's some really important stuff. How big the bore is, how big stroke is, and the stroke is only to get cubic inches. Let's say you have no cubic inch limit. Let's say you can do a mountain motor, the biggest one to go. Okay, well, I still would use the biggest bore, and then I would figure out how fast the piston's going to go up and down at shift RPM or at finish line RPM, and know that the rings have a critical speed where the rings cannot keep up with the piston. And you do it at average feet per minute. I think it's feet per minute on the piston speed, and I think it's somewhere around 6,500 feet per minute at whatever RPM that is. You do the math to figure it up. I think it's RPM times stroke divided by 6 equals feet per minute. And we use 6,500 as a pretty good rule. Now, if you're going to do endurance racing or street racing, you might want to get that down in the 4,800, 4,900. If you're going to run it like at the 24 hours race, you might want to get it, say, in the 4s. If you're going to street strip it, maybe in the 5s is safe, but 6,000, hey Ronnie, 6,000 to 6,500 is pretty good. Now, there are people out there, and we know them, and they're doing great, especially the Mountain Motor Pro Stock car guys with those I don't even know what they are, 825s now. Who knows what they are? Not me, but somebody on here is watching me knows what the cubic inch limit is on the Mountain Motor Pro Stocker. But they do it also with the biggest bore, and then they put the stroke in to reach the cubic inch limit. But it's always limited by bore size. The Pro Mod cars, right now, Alan Johnson sells a V8, a Hemi, big block Chevrolet block or a Hemi block is 5.3 bore spacing. That doesn't mean the bore is 5.3. It's probably got a 5-inch piston, but the pistons are 5.3 inches apart from center to center. So that means it's a, let's see, 300. That means 150 wall, I think, is what they have with a 5-inch bore. This piston is still pretty doggone big. This one there in the S&S Pro Stock powered engines, Matt Smith uses, Hector Arana, Ryan Ayler, those guys are using a piston that's this big, 5.14, 5.15, and the stroke is in the 3s, you guys. They run 3.7, 3.8, somewhere stroke in that range. So to get the piston speed to the right and get the cubic inches to the limit for NHRA on the V-twin is 160 cubes, not 160.2, not 160.1, it's 159.9 or 160.00. So you put the biggest bore. Hey, John Kazi, see there goes my man, 843. John Kazi. That was the Mountain Motor guy just went by. He went by so fast I couldn't see his name. There's Derek, Jim Bob. Hey, Jim. Let's beat me on the 5,300 bore space. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. This stuff is coming through my head so fast because I don't really prepare. I mean, I made like a couple of notes just to expand, and shoot, that clock right there start going at hyperspeed. Pat Musey makes the 959. I know there's some 1,000 cubic inch ones out there, but I was thinking about the rules for the Mountain Motor Pro Stock, not grudge or unlimited. But anyway, hey Scott. Okay, so the piston, I already told you several times, we pick out a ring that will fit the bore we want, and then we design the piston based on the rings. And there's only enough room if you get a good ring pack here, and then the wrist pin goes right under the oil ring as close as you can get it. So you do the best you can to take this real estate right here, and you do your best. Hey, there goes Johnny, and that's John with a Jon. Put the top ring where it's close to the fire as you can get it without breaking into a valve pocket. And I've seen John's piston before. My gosh, his ring land is all into the ring here. We try our best to keep the ring lands, the valves on top of the rings. Now, then when we make real estate for the rings, top ring, second ring, and then the oil ring, then we put the wrist pin up close to it. And the cam, we don't build the engine around a cam. We build a cam to fit the engine. And I want to say this because if we put the most favorite cam in the world in our best engine, these pockets may be so deep that there's no room for the ring. So you have to move the rings down, then you have to move the wrist pin down, then you're going to have to put a shorter rod in it, or you got to take stroke out of it. So we have to decide out of the four events of the camshaft, the intake opening, the intake closing, the exhaust opening, the exhaust closing, and that's not in order, which I'll break that down for you. But what we do is we build the opening of the intake cam where the intake valve opens to where we don't put a big hole in the piston that will get all in the ring. We open the intake valve later so that we can make a nice looking piston. We close the exhaust valve sooner so we can get a nice looking piston. Because if you open the intake valve early, you're going to put a deep pocket here. If you close the exhaust valve late, you're going to put a deep pocket in here. And so there's a negative to everything. In other words, you can focus on one number, like I want my intake opening at 40 degrees before top dead center. Well, good gravy, man. That means your TDC lift is going to be way worse than this. And remember, this is a 10,000 RPM Pro Stock V-twin piston here. And notice how shallow the pockets are. That's because we were opening the intake valve around 20 and we were closing the exhaust valve around 30, so we didn't have to put giant pockets in there. Now, how can you get away with that? Running that little bit of overlap, and the way that is you have to make the valve has to move the cam really fast. We do that with the lobe shape and design, and also rocker ratio. The order that I use my four vents, cam intake, closing is my most important one. That helps me trap when the mixture comes in and the intake valve's open and the piston's going down on the intake stroke. And when the air comes in and the piston turns around and starts coming back up, when the pressure is equal in the cylinder and in the intake port, somewhere that's getting close, I want to close that intake valve right there. And it's probably between 60 and 75 degrees after bottom at 50. To me, that's the most important cam event. Now, there are some guys that argue with me. They don't argue with me. They disagree. We don't argue because there are guys on here way smarter than me. This is just my opinion. And it's the way we've gone fast and won races. I want to tell you that the second most important one to me is the exhaust valve opening. That's when, to me, it's when the piston's going down on the power stroke, and as soon as it gets past peak piston speed, which is about 77, 78 degrees after top dead center, the piston's going by, and the area of that expansion from the explosion is getting jumbo area. It's increasing in area by a ton. So it's, as soon as you lose that work, the power of the power stroke, when the ignition lights, spark plug lights, and the bomb goes off and the piston's going down, as soon as that pressure starts falling like a brick, that's the time to open the exhaust valve, because you don't get it out soon enough. So we open the exhaust valve right there. Hey, Lon, I saw your name on a Pro Stock car. Lon Trice, look at you right there. You've been waiting to sponsor a Pro Stock car forever, and I saw you do it this past weekend. It made me grin. Hi, Steve. Anyway, I saw Lon Trice's name on the back of a Pro Stock car at St. Louis this weekend. All right, back to the intake valve. Oh, the exhaust valve opening. Okay, the exhaust valve opens so that that pressure can expand out while the piston's still going down on the power stroke, and then when it gets to the bottom, it turns around and goes back up. It's going to take longer to get the exhaust out, because we have to decide. It's a compromise between, let me get this, there you go. See how big this intake valve is and how little this exhaust valve is? Oh, that piston's so backwards to me. This comes in because it has only God's atmosphere, only barometer to push the air into this engine. When the piston goes down, creates negative pressure, the intake goes in. When it expands from firing and making a big power stroke, the exhaust goes out. And this valve is really little because we have to sacrifice area to get the best intake valve and biggest intake valve we can in, because bore size is our limit on how much valve we can put in. So we're going to put the most intake valve we can in, and then whatever's left real estate wise, we put an exhaust valve in it, and we have to make up for it with cam timing. I got a few minutes left. Okay, intake valve closing is my number 1, exhaust valve opening is my number 2, and then intake valve opening, let me make sure I said it right. Intake valve closing is my number 1 event. Intake exhaust valve opening is my second most important event, and then intake valve opening is my third most important, and then of course exhaust valve closing is my fourth important. And I know that's hard to follow because I'm even having a hard time saying it. But the way that works for me is that the intake valve closing traps the mixture so that the valve can shut and the piston can squeeze it, and then the spark plug can light it, and then it turns around and makes a big boom. And when the big boom happens, it's going back down, we want the exhaust valve to open. We try to spin, we let the pressure push the piston down and try and blow it out the exhaust system. And then when the piston turns around and it's coming back up on the exhaust stroke, the intake valve has to open before the piston gets to the top on the exhaust stroke, and then the exhaust valve is starting. Let's see, the intake valve is opening, and so the exhaust valve is closing. So they're going to cross right there, and that's overlap. And the TDC lift is when both valves are open at the same time on overlap. When the exhaust intake valve is about to hit the piston, the exhaust valve is about to hit the piston, and both valves are off the seat, and that's TDC lift on overlap. Okay. Piston pocket depth helps us decide how the piston dome looks. So we want to make sure that's right, and then we can work on the compression ratio, which is kind of left after you do all that, because you want to make it, you want to put as much compression in as you can without wrecking any of this. So the valve pockets, cam timing, and ring location make a big difference on what the compression ratio is. And then the last thing, which I know this sounds crazy because people talk about rod length and rod ratio like it's the new kid on the block, but the rod, in my opinion, is the last thing. It doesn't matter to me if the rod is a ½ inch longer or a ½ inch shorter. The only thing that matters to me is the wrist pin fits under a nice ring pack. So if I have enough real estate to get all the rings where I want them, and I have enough room for the wrist pin, and then I have the stroke that I have to get the engine as big as it can be on the rules based on the bore, what's left is the tape measure, where you stick it up there between the crankshaft and the wrist pin, and you say the rod needs to be this long. Now, if a rod has to be longer than that, the only reason I can find it is on a V-twin to keep the pistons from hitting each other. So if the pistons are hitting hard and it limits your bore, you have to put a longer rod in it to get the pistons away from each other. I know that's a lot of complicated stuff. I see I'm just about out of time, but I have a minute. Hey, you guys that are calling me right now, or writing me, or texting me, I'm doing Tech Talk Live right now. Tech Talk Tuesday, number 62. Thankful for all you watching. Hey, look, shoot me a question while I tidy this up. Let's do a real quick question and answer. I like to do a little bit of that, but I see you guys are about 30 seconds behind. So when I answer, you know, your 30 seconds might be used up. So let's try and get one there. Bill, Daniel, Darnell, David. Yeah, rod ratio. That's a relationship between the stroke and the rod length, and it's the bottom of my list. Bore size, valves, stroke, figure out the cam timing based on the rest of the story. Compression ratio is pretty far down, and then rod ratio is pretty far down. Well, it's the last place for me. But like I said, remember you guys, this is an opinion. Everybody has their own. Everybody has their own style, but this is how we've done it in our years. Okay, I see you, David. Same thing, bottom. What is a good camshaft for an M8 at 117? Well, if it has a stock head and stock springs, not a stock head, but stock valve springs, like you haven't taken it apart and you want a bolting cam, will make the most powerful. Hey, John, thank you. The 30-30 cam we sell is the best, and it's not, well, I know it's the best because we sell it. That sounds pretty obvious, but the only reason we made the 30-30 cam was to be the most cam you could put in a stock style Milwaukee 8 with stock springs where you can put 480, 485 lift in it, and we do the 4 events correctly for a stock engine, a 107 to 117 in that range, where the intake valve closes at the right time to suit, the exhaust valve opens at the right time to suit, and the intake valve opens late enough that you don't hit the valves on the piston, and the exhaust valve closes early enough that you don't hit the valves on the piston. So it's a wonderful bolt-in cam. All right, that's the time today. I see the numbers stayed up good. Very thankful for everybody watching. Not cards and letters, but look, I love for you to give me notes, PM me questions, PM me ideas. I haven't run out of ideas to talk about yet. I love the, what was the inlet closing on the Pro Stock engine? I think it was 70, 75 at 50, I believe, somewhere in that range. And the Pro Stock Suzukis, I think the 2 valves close around 75, and the 2 valves are going to close, the 4 valves are going to close probably 65 or 70. So, hey, those are secret numbers. I want to tell y'all thank you again. Roger, God bless you, man. Stay in touch. Send me info. I love for you to send me emails with questions and topics to talk about and stuff you want to know what I meant. Let's do that at george@starracing.com. Hey, one more question. What's your preference to achieve lift by cam lobe or rocker ratio of both? That's a wonderful question. I like a big lobe. I like a big lobe that's aggressive, but if you run out of math with the size of the roller and the acceleration rate to go on the lobe, which is stuff I don't understand really well, then we can put some ratio to it and make it work. But it's really cool to bolt in a more rocker arm. Hey Bryce, bolt in like more ratio and watch the power go up or watch the power go down, which helps teach us which way to go on cam timing. But anyway, I got to roll. My time is up. I hate to burn more bandwidth than I'm allowed. Praise the good Lord. Thank y'all. God bless. You guys look after each other. I hope to see you at Hogs Gone Wild soon. And stay in touch, my friends.